Hello, this is Walter, the English Conversation Doctor, coming to you from Tokyo, Japan. And today we're going to be looking at boosting your vocabulary. So this is going to be a video all about vocabulary boosters. So to get started, boosting your vocabulary, we're going to look at the quick, easy, and natural way to increase your vocabulary. And there's a few ways to do this, but this is one of the quickest and most effective methods that I found. So I want you to pay very close attention to this video. Now, when I ask students in Japan what their biggest problem is with using English, most students immediately say lack of vocabulary. But what I normally have to let them know is that just studying new vocabulary words normally does not fix their main problems with using English. And the reason that is because gaining a lot of new vocabulary words without knowing how to properly use them in conversation is, well, pointless. So this is one concept that a lot of students don't understand. So for most students in Japan, their actual study method for learning new vocabulary is normally to blame. That's why they gain a lot of new vocabulary, or when they study vocabulary, they don't really know how to use it in conversation. So we're going to take a look at this, but I want you to remember that in the natural learning methodology which we're using here, listening and speaking should come before reading, writing, and vocabulary study. So, as I mentioned before, students in Japan have kind of learned the English language backwards because they didn't learn listening and speaking skills first, and they started trying to build grammar and vocabulary before they even had a solid foundation in the language for communication. So if you already know how to hear or listen to English and can speak a little bit using basic conversation, then vocabulary building and learning more complex words becomes the next natural step of the process. So the problem with most English students in Japan is that, well, you kind of have a gap in your vocabulary ability. And the reason why you have this gap is because you learned English in school, right? So you started learning English in school before you had a solid speaking or comprehensive foundation in the language. So this is you in school. Now the question is, what type of English did you study in school? The type of English that you studied in school was more English that was geared towards academic skills, right? So this was reading, writing, vocabulary, and grammar. But the reason why you learned these first, before you learned speaking, is that the English skills that you learned in school were simply focused on passing academic tests, not actually learning how to understand, speak, or fluently communicate in the language. So your goal for English in school was different from conversation. You learned English so that you could pass your high school entrance exam, and then you could get into a good college. Or a lot of students are studying TOEIC, not so that they can speak English, but so that they can pass the TOEIC test in order to get into a good company. That's why most Japanese students have very good reading and writing ability, but still cannot speak English fluently. So after you went to school, and after you learned your academic skills, and after you passed your test, what happened is that most of you jumped right over to business English. So you graduated from school, and you graduated from college, and then you joined a company. And if you use English in your company, you're using business English. So you jumped right over to this area. And don't get me wrong, business English is good, right? We like business English because this is how we make money. However, business English does have a few weaknesses. The weaknesses of business English are that when you're using English for your job, you're mainly using a limited vocabulary range, depending on the type of job you've got. So most of the vocabulary that you're using are, well, job-related. And this also applies to conversation topics. So most of the conversation topics are work-related. You're not talking about like lunches, you're not really talking about dinners, you're not talking about favorite movies, you're not using survival skills, you're not giving directions normally. You're mainly talking about stuff that's only relevant for work, right? So the technical terms and situations that you are using are normally understood by people in the same job industry. So a lot of the vocabulary that you might use as an accountant or as an IT guy, if you try to use these words to somebody who's not familiar with someone who's not familiar with those industries, you're going to have communication problems because they are not used to the vocabulary that you are using. Also, another big problem with business English is that your experience in the job can actually help you cover or hide missing vocabulary skills for comprehension during a conversation. Basically, what that means is that you may know your job too well. So, when you're listening to English and somebody says an English word, well, if you know your job, your brain might actually skip that word. So it's like, oh, I don't really understand what he said, but nah, I know my job, so I can kind of figure it out in Japanese. So this is one reason why reading business-related English materials does not really help you build your vocabulary for daily conversation, because most of it is work-related terminology, and you probably know your job well enough in Japanese to where you don't need to read the entire article. Basically, your brain is lazy. It doesn't need to like work hard to get that information. So that's why I don't recommend business-related materials for English study. So moving on, these are the weaknesses of business English. And these weaknesses actually carry over to your conversation. And the way that they carry over is this. When it comes to unfamiliar topics. So a lot of students, and especially a lot of adult students, are very good about when it comes to talking about their job, right? They can talk about their job all day long. So what do you do? And they can tell me about their business. They can tell me about their clients, and they're very comfortable talking about their job. However, when it comes to unfamiliar topics, they find themselves on kind of an icy bridge here. So he's like, okay, an unfamiliar topic can be anything. For example, small talk. Or what is your favorite restaurant? What is your favorite movie? Um, how many people are in your family? What's on a hamburger? How do I get from Tokyo to Tokyo Station to Shimbashi Station? When it comes to unfamiliar topics, this is generally what happens to most English students in Japan. Bang. The reason why this happens, though, is because you do have this gap. You don't use English for your daily lifestyle. You only learned academic and business English. So a lot of the words that we use in daily conversation or for survival in in the real world, you do not have these vocabulary or these terms or these phrases. That's why you don't feel comfortable talking about them. Outside, you only feel comfortable talking about stuff inside of the office instead of stuff outside of the office. So, we've got this gap. Now, what we need to figure out is how can we fill this gap? What is the easiest and most effective method for filling this gap? And the easiest and most effective method that I found is reading English books. That is correct, reading. Now, the way that reading English books works is that when you read an English book, you're going to look for something that is, one, interesting. So if it's not interesting, you're probably not going to read it. You're going to look for something that's interesting, you're going to look for something that's fun, and you're going to look for something that you want to read. Because if it's not interesting, if it's not fun, and if you don't want to read it, basically you're going to be on the train and you're going to be reading your business-related materials, and after about 5 minutes, you're going to go to sleep because you're not interested in the topic. Instead of being something that's fun or something that you want to read, your English study becomes mindokusai, right? And when your English study becomes mindokusai, your brain cuts off. It doesn't want to do it anymore. So that's why I see people sleeping with books on the train. The materials that they're reading obviously are not interesting and they don't want to read them. So that's a very important thing when it comes to selecting a book. Another thing that you're going to want is you're going to want to get a book that has a story, right? Books with stories tend to be a little bit more interesting, depending on the type of story. And it's something that is engaging because you want to know what happens next in a lot of cases. And a lot of times when I tell my students to go get a book, they run out and they look for the biggest book they can find. I'm talking like, the Bible, and like something that's about like 1,000 pages long. And they're like, I'm going to read this book. Well, you have to remember that your brain works like a muscle. So if you get a big, complicated book, you're not going to be able to read that because your brain is going to get tired, right? It's just like if I tell you to go to the gym and I tell you to lift 500 kilograms right now, unless you're used to lifting 500 kilograms on a regular basis, you're going to break your arms. So you have to be honest with yourself, and you have to go with something that is about your level, something that you can easily understand, or something that might be a little bit difficult for you, but that isn't going to completely fry your brain when you're trying to read it. So children's books are okay. So children's books, and there's no particular genre for these. So you can read children's books or mystery novels if you like mysteries. You can read science fiction books if you're into sci-fi. And you can also read real world documentary type books if that's what you're into. So it really doesn't matter the type of genre of book that you select, because you're going to learn different vocabulary types of vocabulary words from each of these books. But what you're looking for is something more than just vocabulary. So, for example, this is the natural way to boost your vocabulary and English comprehension. If you think about it, this is exactly the same way that you had to boost your Japanese vocabulary and comprehension in school. You did it by reading. Reading children's books at home, reading books in school. This is where you got your vocabulary from. So, let me get rid of these books here. That last book was my own book, by the way. The one that I published. So, by reading English books, you're going to get a few things, right? So, if you read English regularly, you can learn daily conversational and survival English skills. You'll also learn elementary English and language foundations. So basically what I mean by elementary English and language foundation is you'll learn basic vocabulary, basic English phrases, basic English grammar, the usage of past, present, and future tense, and basic adjectives and adverbs. These are things that English-speaking children know, but Japanese language students don't have. And that's why daily conversation and talking about other topics is very difficult for a lot of students in Japan, because you simply did not learn these because English is not part of your daily lifestyle and you're not used to reading the language on a regular basis. But what this will do, once you start reading, is it will build a fundamental English skills bridge between what you learned in school and what you use in business. So it'll look something like this. You've got your school knowledge and you're walking back and forth. You can transition with no problems and you're not going to fall into the gap because the vocabulary that you're getting from reading these books is helping to fill this gap. So now you'll be able to hold conversations on a lot more interesting and different topics than you're used to. So it'll give you a little bit more freedom and versatility when you're actually dealing with native English speakers. So this will give you a stronger vocabulary base, an increased range of conversation topics, more English phrases that native speakers use daily, an increased ability to quickly and properly identify words when listening to English speakers. So remember, your listening skills in English are based on words that you can identify, that your brain can identify. So for those of you who are still not familiar with that concept, you'll find a few lectures in this course. One is like 80-20 listening, and we cover that in that particular lecture. And another one is the Pareto's principle, the 80-20 rule. So if you haven't watched those lectures before, you're getting to this one, I highly recommend that you watch those lectures, and then it'll get you up to speed on what we're talking about. But these are all of the benefits that you'll receive by starting to read more English. And like I said, this is the same process that you use to naturally start building your Japanese vocabulary base, right? So it's nothing that's too difficult or too uncommon because it's something that you've done before. So moving on, a lot of students ask me, but Walter, what about vocabulary lists? Now, in Japan, a lot of English schools and a lot of English teachers love vocabulary lists. So, like when a student goes to an English school, the first thing that the teacher will give them is a textbook, and he will tell them, here's your vocabulary list of 20 or 30 words. I want you to study this, and I want you to memorize these words by next week. So the student runs out and he's very happy. He's like, yes, I have my vocabulary list. I'm going to learn all of these words. And then he comes to class the next week, and his normal teacher is not there. It's me instead. So, what happens is he asked me, well, I have a vocabulary list, so are we going to study that today? And generally I tell him no. That's because, in my opinion, vocabulary lists are generally a waste of time, right? And I'll explain why that is in a little bit. But just learning a lot of different random words doesn't necessarily help your English speaking ability. So generally, I don't give my students vocabulary list because they are boring, for one. And they don't teach you how to effectively use the word when speaking. They only teach you the definition of a word, not the full range of usages that each word may have. So, like I said, if you're reading something that is boring, you lose interest. As soon as you lose interest, your brain cuts off. That means you're not learning anything. So, you can only really learn how to use the full range of a word by reading and hearing the word used frequently and in different situations. That's how you naturally learn vocabulary. You naturally learn new words by repetition and by hearing and seeing them used in different situations. So what that really means is the way that you really learn vocabulary is by practical application, which is the same way you naturally learn to get good at everything else that you do in life. Basically, you practice. So, I don't recommend vocabulary lists for language studies. unless you're really focused on a specific area for your job. If you're in like for example, if you're working an IT job, then you'll need to know like a IT related vocabulary. At that point, you might want to study some like IT related vocabulary, and a vocabulary list could come in handy. But keep in mind, this will only give you the definition of the words. It will not teach you how to use them in conversation. So you have to be very careful of that. Now, reading more English and will also help you in the following areas. It'll help you by improving your reading speed and accuracy for tests like TOEIC, CASIC, and many of the other tests that are out there. So one of the biggest problems that students have when taking the TOEIC test is not necessarily their English language ability, is that they simply don't have the test-taking skills to pass the test. And one of the skills that you need for passing the TOEIC test is actually the ability to read quickly and accurately. So the biggest problem for a lot of students taking the TOEIC test is actually time. They simply spend too much time reading. So if you start to read English daily in your daily life, then your reading speed will naturally increase, and that'll make the TOEIC test much easier for you to take. This will also help by improving your performance for English-related job assignments and tasks at work. Again, a lot of students do have to use English at work, but it's primarily for like reading or writing, some like maybe reading emails or writing emails. But if you're not used to reading English, or if your English reading speed is slow, then your job is going to take forever, right? And it's going to cause you a lot of stress because you're wasting a lot of time. So reading English books will definitely help you improve your reading speed, and that will help you improve your job performance when you receive an email. You can just fly through it and understand what the client is talking about, and then you can move on to the next task, and you can go home at 6 o'clock, which is what you should be doing anyway. This will also help by increasing your listening comprehension for English conversations. So as I mentioned, your ability to listen to and hear English words highly depends on how many words you can quickly identify. If your brain cannot identify the word, then it will either get caught in a loop trying to understand it, or it may skip the word. But if you're reading and you're seeing new vocabulary and you're getting new words all the time, you're basically adding these new words to your mental dictionary. So next time you hear a native English speaker say this word, your brain is like, I read this word. I know what this word means. Okay, I know this word too. So you don't have so many like, what does this word mean? Situations pop up. So it will definitely help you increase your listening, because you're just going to start picking out words faster, and you'll understand them. Now, reading also helps by making English fun and less stressful for you to use in your daily life, by filling that gap that you've already got. So, a lot of students have a lot of stress when they're listening or like speaking English because they don't know the vocabulary words that they need to use in different situations. That's one of the biggest complaints. Like, I want to express myself, but I don't know the vocabulary word. You probably don't know the vocabulary word because you didn't study this vocabulary word in school. You haven't used this vocabulary word for your daily lifestyle, and you don't need this particular word in your job. So, reading will give you will increase your range of vocabulary so that you can start to fill in this gap, and you can start to use words that are necessary for conversation. Once you find that you have access to more words in your dictionary, then speaking English actually becomes much less stressful and much more fun. Like, okay, yeah, I can say everything that I want to say because I have an increased vocabulary base. So I don't want you to take my word for any of this. I want you to try it for yourself and see the results. If you try to read one English book per month, I guarantee you'll see results, and your vocabulary will naturally start to increase, and you'll find that speaking becomes easier. Speaking and listening should become easier for you. Okay? So just give it a shot. Now, warning. Do not overstudy vocabulary, right? This is another big problem that I tend to have with English students, and one of the things that I have to fix for them. A lot of students, when they're studying English, they tend to overstudy. And what I mean by overstudying is they will get their vocabulary list, and they have their 30 words. And so they're like, Walter, here's my vocabulary list that my English teacher gave me last week. And I've studied all of these words for like 6 hours a day. So I'm like, okay, cool. Give me your vocabulary list. And then I start picking random words. I'm like, okay, what does this word mean? And the student's like, I don't know. What does this word mean? I don't know. How do you use this word in a sentence? I don't know. Can you tell me what is the past or present or future tense of this word? And the final answer is, I don't know. So I'm like, well, basically you studied for a week and you didn't learn anything. So then I asked the student, well, how did you study these vocabulary words? And the student at this point normally pulls out a dictionary, right? So one of the biggest problems that students tend to repeatedly make, or one of the biggest mistakes that students tend to repeatedly make, is that a lot of students make the mistake of overstudying vocabulary words, and they do this by taking a simple word like cake and looking it up in the dictionary. But when you look a word up in the dictionary has far too much information for students to learn about that simple word. There's no way a normal student can remember everything, which is what they shouldn't be trying to do anyway, because even a native English speaker does not know every definition or every usage of every word. It's impossible. There's too much. So, they'll take a word like cake and they'll look it up in the dictionary, and then what normally happens is that instead of learning what the word actually means and how it can be used, students normally wind up frustrated and confused. Because, look at this. This is a dictionary entry for the word cake. See how much information there is? And actually, this is only like a third of the page. There's much more online. So I normally don't recommend using a dictionary to look up a word unless you really need a full definition. So one workaround to this that I recommend to my students is that a much easier study method to study vocabulary is by using quick define. And you can quick define words by simply looking them up in your web browser or like Google Translate in order to get a basic definition, like so. So you'll take the word cake and you'll go online and you'll look it up in Google Translate. Now, Google Translate is not good for phrases or long pages of text. You will get a really messed up definition every time. However, it is pretty accurate for singular words. So when you're reading your English book and you run across a vocabulary word that you don't know, just go to Google Translate and do a quick define on it. It's going to say cake, and it'll give you a definition. In this case, there's not really so much of a definition here. It's just giving you the katakana spelling of it. But in Japanese, cake and cake are pretty much the same as in English. But this is a very good way to get a basic definition of the word. Once you have your basic definition, do not research any further, just move on. Because what you're looking for is you're looking to see or hear this word again later on in the book. And the more you hear this word, then the other definitions and the other usages will naturally start to come out, right? So this should make things much easier for you to understand. Remember, you don't have to know everything about a vocabulary word in order to use it effectively. A lot of English schools tell you you have to know everything about this word, so study, 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 but that's not true. Even your English teacher doesn't know everything about the word cake, so don't worry. You really just need to have the basic concept and a basic definition at first. Everything else will naturally come after that, so there's no need to rush it. One more thing to remember. Learning new vocabulary words is a very good thing, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to use these new words when speaking. See, learning new vocabulary words will broaden your overall ability to identify terms and increase understanding of native speed English conversations. But the primary goal of any conversation or presentation is to make sure that everyone in the room can understand what you are trying to say. A lot of Japanese students who've been studying English in Japan for a while have a very bad habit of trying to use big, new, sophisticated, and complex vocabulary words that they are not really so familiar with during their conversations and presentations with native English speakers or business clients. Now, they do this because they think or have been taught that using complex vocabulary will make them sound more like native English speakers. But this is not true. Remember, the purpose of verbal communication is to make sure that the people around you can understand your views and perspectives. So it doesn't matter how many big or complex vocabulary words you know if nobody can understand you. Simple communication is the most effective communication. So if you're giving a presentation to 100 people in a room, your target should be to communicate in a way that ensures 100 people will understand and preferably agree with your point. Also, using new vocabulary words that you are unfamiliar with or are not comfortable using during a conversation can actually weaken your conversation or presentation points by making you sound unconfident in the topic that you are discussing. So, business clients and native English speakers, in most cases, will be able to pick up on the fact that you are not familiar with a word due to voice tone changes, struggled speech, or communication breaks, which are like stuttering, stammering, or saying a lot when you're speaking. They'll pick this up because your speech will not flow smoothly. This is especially dangerous during a negotiation, debate, or sales presentation because it can actually lower the overall value of your opinion or your product in the eyes of a customer, client, or a native English speaker. So remember, gaining new vocabulary is a good thing, but try to keep your communication style simple and efficient so that everyone can understand you. That's the purpose of communication. So, in summary, learning to increase your own vocabulary isn't difficult and is actually quite easy to do. All you have to do is read or listen to more English in many different situations and define new words that you don't know yet. That's basically it. So I hope this helps. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop me a line on Udemy or on my website, and I'll make another lecture for you. I'll give you a solution. And that's it for this video. Have fun with your studies.